And one of the hardest things for me to accept was that I shouldn't be here, because I believe in human rights. So I believe in choice, and I believe I have a right. And one of the hardest things that I realised, one of the biggest learning curves for me, was that a man doesn't have that. Okay, because as soon as a man opens up and says, "Can I just tell you this?" instantly he is silenced, instantly. And that was one of the most profound things that affected me emotionally.
Hello and welcome to the show where I try and make a little sense out of this stunning and increasingly brave new world that we all live in by talking to a series of expert witnesses about their experiences, interests and concerns. And today I'm talking Sense Not Sensibility with Sally-Anne Burris, founder of the Split the Difference initiative, which has recently launched an international campaign calling for equality in governance and services for boys and men. The aim of the campaign is to highlight the deeply rooted inequalities for boys and men that currently exist within public services. And over the next few years, Split the Difference hope to develop a worldwide network of voices calling on all 195 United Nations member states to ensure that their policies and strategies are fully inclusive of boys and men. The campaign is a result of a research project conducted by Sally that examined legislation, service provision and funding strategies across 15 different countries. And over the hour we'll be discussing that research, what motivated Sally to take it beyond the UK and her ambitions for the project. Sally has also kindly agreed to respond to some questions and comments that followed the short video I uploaded earlier this week to help promote a walk to Downing Street that Split the Difference have planned for Saturday the 12th of September. There's a lot to pack in, so the runtime is slightly longer than usual. In roughly 10 minutes we'll get to the main interview, but I want to begin by playing the extended version of an earlier chat I had with Sally, which featured in the video promoting the Walk for Men. In it, she sets out a succinct summary of what the campaign hopes to achieve and explains why it is she has organised a walk in central London to help promote equality and human rights for boys and men.
So Split the Difference has been designed after 5 years research that ended up looking at over 15 countries across the world, exploring the equality in services for men and boys. It came from a place of domestic abuse, but it's grown into something larger than that now. We've now looked at education and health. There's lots of areas within that, 13 actually, if you go on our website, that have been identified as a common denominator where there's not equality for men and boys. The research showed us many things. It showed us some are completely excluded from acts of law, legislation, policy, and strategic planning and fiscal spending. And the end result of that was that I wrote this campaign that is designed to be presented to the United Nations and request that the United Nations change legislation either to include men and boys, so the narrative includes them, or to make them gender neutral. And the reason for that was because initially we were going to look at UK, obviously it started here, but when I started looking internationally for best practice at where men and boys were included in equality to women and girls, I realised that it just wasn't present anywhere. That's why we went international, because I was looking for best practice, thought the UK had got it wrong, but actually it's in every single country we've looked at. Then we looked at the United Nations on their equality, all their equality, diversity, some of the things, the 6 committees that govern that, what's available for men and what men's voices are within that. And it became evident that, again, men are not present there. They just aren't. They simply aren't. So we then went from there and looked at narratives. We looked at social narratives, because one of the questions in the research was, how could society accept this? What makes this acceptable? So we started looking at the narrative within adverts, third sector, TV, even things like here it's EastEnders, even things like dramatised shows that were fantasy, but to look at the narratives within that. And we realised there was a huge picture of how men's needs and how they're portrayed is negatively unequal. And from that, we launched on July the 1st. The launch was that every single UN country in New York received a launch letter, which is on our website. And we also notified the heads of states in 143 countries. So we managed to find the contact details of heads of states, and they were informed via email. And we also contacted some news agencies in each of those countries. And then now we're in the middle of planning for a march in London. The reason we have want that march is because we feel like we need to act on our words. It's not enough to talk about things, or it's not enough to have a media presence on the internet, Twitter and all of that. We feel like you need to act on that as well. And it is our hope that the work we're doing currently, that next year we will be able to do that in unison with other countries. We're currently in the middle of negotiating and advertising with some other countries. There's 11 we're talking to at the moment. Great. Who are going to set up committees in their countries. The idea is that 195 committees will be set up in each of the member state countries, and then those committees will work in unison with Split the Difference. And so next year, that march then hopefully will be joined by other countries who also want to stand up and say, look, we need to get this right now. You know, it may not have been right in the past. Well, there's no may, there isn't, it wasn't. There's lots of no's about it, but now it needs to be right, because there is some horrendous things going on for men and boys, which in humanity you wouldn't even believe that could happen now. You know, it's crazy. I mean, one of the things we've recently published is that we did some research way back when, and we verified it again about 2 weeks ago, that every single country in the whole world, I mean we're talking worldwide, every single country in the whole world has a minimum of 2 out of 3 men and boys who commit suicide, and some of those boys are as young as 10 years old. This is not, it's not an anomaly, you know. This is, I mean, in some cases it was 4 out of 5, and even there are a couple of countries at the top that are 6 out of 5 out of 6 suicides of men and boys, and that's just one example of the issues that are happening for men and boys. So we need to get it right, and we need to stand up, and we need to act on that and be visible. You know, it's just time. It's time.
Yeah. And that's and that first step of being visible is going to be the march on the 12th of September. And I'll include links as to kind of how you can join in on that, and you know, additional details. One of the things I was interested to see, do you want to say a little bit about the T-shirts that you're asking people for?
Yeah, that's fine. So what we did was, as part of the march, we wanted to have a symbol that showed that we were all marching for men and boys. We've invited other organisations to join us. Split the Difference is designed as a platform to share other people's work. Okay, it's not designed about us and what we want to achieve. I mean, we've got one focus. It simply is one focus, and that is to change legislation, policy, and strategic planning. Around that, though, we see through our research there are many organisations who've been attempting to do this for a really long time, but because they have no solidarity, there's nothing that unifies them, or even a platform that brings them all together. We designed a T-shirt where one was because we needed to raise funds, and we believe in fair exchanges, no robbery. So we wanted to give something in as a business to be sustainable, so that we can pay for the people that we need, the specialists. But the other thing was, on the march, we've asked that people purchase a T-shirt so that it links people together. One of the T-shirts, it says on the one side, it says, "I'm supporting him." If you're walking with a sister or a wife or somebody, we have a T-shirt that says, "I'm supporting her." they're designed in a way where if a full rugby team was going, they could all wear "I'm supporting him" left and right. So there's something united about this. But we wanted organisations or individuals who have their own message to bring their own banners and to walk with us with their own message and their own leaflets and their own information, because this is about people who are more specialised in their groups. So, for example, there's groups that focus on mental health.
Yeah.
Some are focusing on sexual violence, because while our narrative in the world says only women are victims of that, we actually know that actually it's men and boys as well. Yeah. So we've asked all agencies, bring your own banners, but kindly buy our T-shirts, because that shows that we are walking for the same reason,
Yeah, perfect. And I saw a dance that was on your website. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, when the T-shirts that we designed were to be accessible by all levels. Okay, we have got a children's range coming out, but we work with some young people because they are our future, and we've worked with some that are very young, as young as 8. And we put this out as a call, and we said we're looking for people to model our T-shirts. And Mum and 3 of her children she's got mixed sex children, and she really could see why she wanted her son to have some future that was equal to her daughter's. And she jumped on it and said, my children love street dance, they really like it, they learn in it and whatever. And she said to me, look, I'm really happy if we can do a piece for you with some street dance, and would you record that and put it on your website? So we've done that, and you can see it there. I mean, it's lovely because there are some very sweet photos of these children that are being put on our social media at the moment, and they kind of epitomise really about, we as we get older, in this battle of the sexes that goes on between men and women, we get to a point where we forget what innocence is like. We forget what this is really about, and this is about making sure that our boys and our girls and our men and our women all have the same choice and ability to kind of move forward and thrive. And this little dance that they did to us, we really loved it. I would have liked to have recorded more. We have got the offer, and I would like to take them somewhere where they can perform for us, because they're absolutely amazing. They're everything that we want this campaign to be, which is inclusive at all levels, all ages, doesn't matter who you are, So yeah, they're very good.
And there will be a link in the show notes to further details about the Walk for Men for anyone, male or female, young or old, wishing to join Sally on the 12th of September. And as you'll see later, Sally has asked me to clarify that there is no cost for participating in the actual march, and that the purchase of T-shirts is entirely optional. And so, a few days after that initial chat, Sally was kind enough to sit down for a more lengthy discussion about her research and the journey that led her to start the Split the Difference initiative. And by the way, apologies in advance for the slightly wonky signal strength at a few points in this recording. So, as I was saying, I'm obviously very keen to hear about the research, particularly, the really, I suppose, kind of the relatively unique element of your project is you're kind of targeting at that sort of high kind of global policy level of, kind of what flows from the United Nations. And it is something that, I think it is very significant to highlight, because particularly I would be aware of, for example, the UN Convention on Discrimination Against Women, and that's something that's been ratified and reported on certainly in the UK, in Ireland, and kind of most kind of Western countries. And on the one hand, that I think most people would look at that and see it as kind of like a very noble venture, but the very fact that there's nothing similar for men and boys means that, to my mind, it serves to circumvent any focus on men and boys discrimination. So is that partly kind of where you were coming from when you started your research?
My research started when I created a whole family domestic abuse service with 6 other organisations, and it was non-gendered. So it was centered around the children, and we did a lot of research. It took approximately a year to create it, and then we took a further time span to put it through a pilot to evaluate it. And so in actual fact, that would the full research would have started in the beginning of 2014. But at the end of 2015, it was my job to take this. It was a procured piece of work by the Police and Crime Commissioner in South Wales and the National Offenders Management Service. So, and once that was created with all these specialist organisations, it was my role to take it out into the community. And because it was a licensed intervention, it meant that we would train people up to use it. It was whole family domestic abuse, and it was non-gendered. Okay. When I went into the service community with this, we were getting a lot of barriers, and they were from female services. So I then thought that Sorry, go on.
Can you give a couple of examples of the sort of barriers you're kind of coming up against?
Okay, so I've been working in the service industry for 30 years, okay, long time.
Yeah.
And I've delivered supporting people services, worked in partnership with every agency, child protection, POVA, whatever is a social issue or factor for somebody, my support team, we would work within that remit. So I'm very well versed in doing lots of tasks and working in lots of partnerships. So because I had the most free time, I took this into the service industry, meaning housing associations. I went into the sectors kind of, there's a hierarchical sector that sits where we've got management committees and strategic planning groups and Welsh Government groups and lots of other things. They're networking groups, and they're designed for lots of different reasons, but I was part of them. So in that you'll find housing associations, you'll find drug and alcohol agencies, you'll find domestic abuse agencies, women-led, female-led. You'll find lots of kind of child protection, child development, lots of agencies like that working within that network. I went into there to say, this is what we've been doing. Lots of them knew what we were doing anyway. Welsh Government knew what we were doing. Lots of housing providers knew what we were doing, but I took it in there as a finished intervention, and then started telling people about it, letting people know. I had been advised by Welsh Government to become part of some of the other networking groups, specifically around domestic abuse. So strategic planning groups that were going out throughout Wales. I was asked to get involved with a couple of those groups attached to police and crime commissioners, and there were some things going on with the National Assembly for Wales and Welsh Government. And I'd been directed to those groups by Welsh Government, and no matter what I did, and no matter who told them that they needed to accept me into these groups, I was getting blocked. And I was given the runaround. And in the end, I did what I normally do, is to say, OK, if they're going to make it difficult for me, I will go above that. And that's what I did. And I did a piece of research to prepare the whole family domestic abuse service to be seen by the Assembly members of the Welsh Government. And I'd made appointments and saw over 15 of the Assembly members to go to meet with them and discuss this whole family non-gendered domestic abuse survey. Okay. And that document that I put together to prepare the Assembly members was 3 pages long. It took me 3 months to do. And the research that I did to prepare them, because I knew that the female agenda is something that the Assembly members and government members have to deal with every single day of the week, and it can be quite a powerful force that they have to deal with. Yeah. When you approach people with something that's non-gendered, it was designed so that we could work with men or women who were victims, and we don't like that word, but victims of domestic abuse. Sure. It's a barrier. It is evidently a barrier. So that piece of research took me down into layers. Instead of looking at the normal, just statistical evidence, the kind of up-to-date current things that were going on within strategic planning and legislation has its strategies that are reviewed normally every 3 to 5 years. Instead of just looking at those kind of layers, I actually went down into the layers and I looked at historical stuff and stuff that was impacting on those strategies. And I wanted to link all of those strategies together, because the program that we've created is a therapeutic intervention, but it encumbers more than one legislative directive. It actually takes on board things like ACEs and housing and health and well-being and future generations, and it's a multitude of legislative strategies. So I wanted a link to look at the link, so I built it up. So it took me into, and I went down into the layers. That was a massive eye-opener for me. It was a journey, and I've worked in the sector a really long time, and I've looked at these things and contributed to this legislation in planning groups, and that actually sat me back in my chair for a few months. So after I'd gone to Welsh Government and I'd gone to the National Assembly for Wales and I had those meetings, I knew it just was not going to stop. I knew that there was a lot that I needed to understand, and to be honest, through the process of the research, I guess from a service delivery perspective, or when you're a service that's supporting women and girls or men and boys, you will look at what funding's available in the community, what the strategic planning is for that community. You'll look at what procurement is available within that community. If you're somebody like me who's used to delivering procured services. My research made it very evident that there is a layer in the. I started to understand why, for 15 years of delivering services, that we'd always hit a wall when we were trying to support men or boys. I mean, I run 2 organisations, okay, and one of them was a supporting people organisation, so the funding was supporting people, and through 15 years. My responsibility, my outcomes for that funding was to ensure that homelessness, or the cycle of homelessness, was prevented, okay, either prevented or reacted to. And through all of that time, we'd often had men come into us and disclosing about domestic abuse in lots of different remits. Not only that, though, but housing issues and, attempting to get accommodation when they didn't meet the immediate need, and we'd always had barriers, and I had never, not once, ever turned a man or a boy away because we couldn't find services to refer them to. And when I started doing this research, I suddenly realised why, and how systemic and how pushed out of services men and boys were. And my research in the UK included 15 acts of law and the strategic planning that came out of those acts of law. And my research in the UK looked at how they were knitted together. So it wasn't just looking at Housing Act or looking at the domestic abuse. England and Wales is slightly different. It wasn't just looking at those. It was looking at things like education. It was looking at health. It was looking at the well-being stuff, and it was looking at how those interacted with each other. So for a human being, for somebody who presents to a service, no matter what that service is, it doesn't really matter, whether it's health or whether it's education, whatever that service is, that service never works in isolation. It is linked. They are knitted together like a puzzle, and when somebody presents with a set of needs, how that service is delivered to them is determined by their assessment of needs, okay? And no matter whether you present to homelessness and housing, or whether you go into a health department or a hospital, as soon as you refer, you are assessed, they will look at what those needs are. So the interaction between them is quite evident when you kind of look at the mapping. When you look at the strategies that come out of that, because each one has its own strategies, and each one, again, those strategies link together, and it filters down like a cascade into the end product, which is how services are delivered, how the person who walks in from the street what they will meet when they walk in is dictated by all of those components.
Yes.
And I looked at all of the UK that I could see that was kind of common denominators or things that whole families would need, no matter what their circumstances. So I looked at all of them. I actually even looked at contract law, because contract law in the UK is wrapped up in how services are planned for and how they're delivered. So even that was involved. So it might not be relevant to a man or a woman who has needs that they're looking for assistance with, but contract law impacts on procurement law. So I even looked at that. And after a year of looking at the UK, I realised the UK just wasn't getting it right. They just weren't. And no matter how, I couldn't find any evidence that they were getting it right at all for men and boys. For women and girls, I mean, sorry.
Yeah, well, no, I was just going to say, is it fair to say that sort of, I mean, essentially what you're describing is that you kind of public funded services across a wide range of different areas where you were kind of finding they're impacting dramatically different in terms of the cascade of outcomes purely based on sex. Yeah.
Yes. And it's quite evident. I mean, anybody that wants to look at this in a kind of, I don't know, in a kind of gentle way, if you look at health and well-being and read the legislation that governs that, and then you go online and look at your local hospital and have a look at their safeguarding policies, okay? If you read their safeguarding policies and look at the procedures for anybody that needs safeguarding, their domestic abuse policy and how their different wards, different units deal with that is completely different. It's all written. You have to look at it 2 layers. It is written in the female narrative, and most policies and acts of law, even if they're not directly supporting women and girls, they will be written in the female narrative. So you'll see lots of references to how you support women, how you support girls, and sort of risk management is all tied into how you would respond if a woman or a girl presents. It doesn't matter what context that is. It doesn't matter whether somebody's walking in the doors of an education department or whether they're walking in the doors of a hospital. Okay, the narrative and the response, the procedures that are responsive to the need will be written in a female narrative. I mean, one of the key things that kind of ended my UK hunt and me saying, Sal, UK's got it wrong, was when I read hospital policy. When I looked at a hospital policy, because it was so far removed to some context away from domestic abuse, which is how this started. That I thought, well, this is about health, okay? So, and when I read their policy, a hospital's policy, and I realised that their safeguarding policy was all directed towards women and girls. I mean, and that was it. It finished it for me. The UK was finished at that point. And then I thought, okay, that's it. I'm not looking at this anymore in the UK. I'm going to go elsewhere. And when I looked
elsewhere to look for kind of best practice examples.
I went yeah. I didn't go looking for more problems. I literally went looking for best practice. I didn't go looking to find another country was doing the same thing. I went looking for a country.
Yeah, sorry. No, just let me ask you this just before we go to the kind of the wider kind of world stage, because absolutely, this is kind of what's got me into this area as well. I mean, you talk about sort of systemic impacts, and that's the key thing to this for me is that sort of the word systemic discrimination is bounded about quite widely in society these days. And there are reasons for that clearly, but in terms of kind of overt systemic discrimination that you can actually point at, that is written in a policy, I find it impossible to find anything that comes remotely as close to the violence against women and girls strategy, which overarches all victims of domestic violence, including men and boys, which is that's I'm assuming kind of that's a similar sort of revelation. I'm just curious in terms of your experience of the likes of equality impact assessments and, kind of the Equality Act responsibilities that, the likes of local government in Wales would have had? I mean, did that ever really kind of come into play at all, or was it just simply, well, it doesn't really matter for this?
It did come into play. I did look at it. I'm very fortunate that I'm quite well networked, in as much as I've always got involved with the things that impact on human beings and the services they need, and how our services are governed. I've always because I deliver services, I've always got involved in the stuff that's going on. I looked at the equality of Welsh Government. I looked at it as actually wrapped up in child protection, court services and stuff like that. And I looked at the equality stuff that was directly coming from Welsh Government.
Yeah.
And this is why one of the reasons that directed me to go down in the layers. You can't look at this at one level. You have to look at it as it goes down, because if you look at some states, like for example, I'll give you an example. The simplest example is if you look at UN and look at the human rights, okay, and you read human rights, it looks amazing, right? It's the most beautifully written statement that you could ever read if you're somebody like me and you, okay, it's lovely.
Yeah.
But if you then take that statement and then you go down into the layers of what that translates to within the UN, you will realise it is simply a statement. Okay, it is simply a statement, because they do not take that right down into every single layer, every strategy, policy or procedure. And the equality in Wales was the same. If you look at the frontline stuff, I refer to it as people facing. If you look at the people facing stuff, you are going to see something that is written beautifully, is poetic, and it really is beautiful stuff, But if you pull that apart and you go down, I would say two or three layers underneath to see, okay, there's the statement. Let's see how that's got to feed into all of our strategies, and then you go down into those strategies and you take it to the end journey, which is the delivery of services, and you will see it's completely changed. And I did that in the UK. Okay. I did it in the UK. It took me a year to do it. I'd already read, I already knew the acts of law and legislation because I'd done it as part of my procurement, but I reread every single one and I cross-referenced every single one of those 15. Okay. So that's the UK. All right. That was the UK. I've since revisited the equality and actually got hold of the equality department here, but they're advertising at the moment for an equality lead, so I'm waiting for them to go into place.
Okay, great. Okay, so then you went further afield looking for best practice examples of kind of how to do this right. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay, and do you want to talk about what you found then?
Yeah. The whole family domestic abuse service that we'd created, we'd already set up relationships with Australia and New Zealand. The reason being, one of the intervention was quite widely known. One of the therapeutic interventions was quite widely known in Australia and New Zealand. I already had contact there, and because I'd seen some of this stuff through the therapeutic side, I thought maybe their policies or acts of law would be more supportive towards men and boys. So I started off in Australia and New Zealand, and I looked at theirs. Did a similar piece of work that I did here in the UK. Couldn't find anything. So then I looked at America. Then I looked at Canada. Then I looked at some European countries where there was English translations available. Then I looked at some African countries, and I looked at some Arab countries. I wanted to look at the comparison because the further down the line I went with the research, I realised, because we, in our arrogance, we will often assume that westernized developed countries, their policy and their governance will be more suited to human rights.
Sure.
And then by the time I'd gone through a few of these countries, I'd realised actually that's not present. It's not feeding down and filtering for men and boys. So I started looking at some of the Arab countries and some of the African countries because of the diversity within culture and the religious belief. I wondered whether their policies would have had any impact because of that, and therefore being different, because sometimes where there's nothing, and we have, we don't have wealth, that human practices are different. So I was looking for best practice there. And I just couldn't find it.
Right. Okay.
And by the time I reached, I think I'd have to look at my notes, but it was over 15 countries. And by the time I reached that zone, it just sat me back in the chair for literally about 4 months. It might have been longer than that. And I thought, I just sat there thinking, I just don't get it. I don't understand. And I know it sounds pretty pathetic, really. But I really genuinely didn't understand how a world environment that says that we live, by human rights and equality and diversity and, all of those things. And I could not find anywhere that gave men and boys the exact same kind of, I don't know, the same choice, just basic choice. I couldn't find it. And I thought, right, that's it. Do you know what, Brian? What it did to me as a woman, right, is I had 1 year as a woman that I was extremely angry.
Okay.
And I don't get angry. Anger is not something I ever hold. I don't hold any ill feeling. I've never been able to, because I always see the other person's point of view. And it sat me in my chair hosting anger for a year. And everywhere I was going, it was like the Twilight Zone. That's what it did to me. Because when you have a belief system where you believe that there's equal choice for everybody, you understand. Like I understand that there's differences, and I understand the culture. And I've been to countries that aren't developed, and I understand there's impacts in those ways. But in a westernized culture, in one I'd worked and delivered services in for 30 years. And all of a sudden, I'm seeing a reality that I can't even perceive, and that's the truth of it. And I don't think.
If I could, I think kind of what you're describing is, I think, very similar to what a lot of people who have come to work in this area have experienced, and it's kind of described as that kind of red pill moment for a reason, because it's something that. It doesn't compute because it goes against human decency in an area where one has always assumed the purpose of the projects we're talking about is about helping vulnerable people. I think that's kind of partly one of the reasons why it's sort of kind of continued under the radar in some respects, because kind of it doesn't compute. And therefore, kind of, unless you sort of start really looking at it, and then you realize how big the barriers are to actually get it addressed. The question I was going to ask, in terms of kind of research across, I think you said 15 countries in total, was there a common denominator then that if you weren't finding the examples of good practice? Because I was particularly interested in what you said about kind of looking at some of the less developed countries where there may be more of, kind of less infrastructure in terms of regulations and such, perhaps, but possibly more of that just old-fashioned community spirits of kind of, doing the right thing for the community. Because without sort of preempting your next experience, certainly the layers of regulation and bureaucracy can actually sort of turn into barriers sometimes. So were there any kind of common denominators you find?
I think in the underdeveloped countries, there's a lot of what you're seeing is a tick box policy, policies where people are obviously, and countries are obviously attempting to develop this unified approach that the UN advocates, and you can see that there, but it stops at a certain level. It doesn't integrate down into society. It just stops at that one level where for me, if you were going if you're looking at a country that wants to develop its trade or its political status in the world, you can see it at that level. You can't see it front line. And you've got other issues in developing, because where you've got men who are still living in what might be called traditional roles, where they are deemed the ones who've got to go out and work whatever they're doing.
Okay.
They literally are workmen. That's it, you know. So you're not seeing any evidence of any cultural, I could say, gentleness or acceptance of them as anything else than that. And so the abuse is often far more abusive, right? Because it literally, where we've got no way of disclosure in the UK has backed up at least by a court system, or there is somewhere somebody can go. But in these developing countries, there is often nowhere. And if a woman turns on a man and says he's abusing me, he will be arrested, he will be put in prison, and he's locked away without anything. So a lot of it doesn't go reported at all. It's, it's like zero reporting, you know. So for men in those countries, it's a lot harder. And the policies only go to that middle level. They don't go down any further, you know. So
yeah. Sorry. Well, that makes sense. Go on.
Okay, so in westernized environment, I looked at 13. There's 13 common denominating areas. Okay, on the website, and I'd identified these through about when I got to year 2. These 13 common denominators had started to become evident. So things like court processes. Okay, so if you look at court processes, my research had looked at whether when a man presents due to, say, childcare or divorce or family court, I looked at those processes. Okay, now those processes are pretty much identical wherever you go. There are obviously differences, you know, but they're similar processes in that there's an assumption that the man is always going to be the perpetrator of something, and there is an assumption that the woman will always need additional support or care to be cared for through that process. So surrounding court processes are a lot of agencies. There's allowances for women as they go through that processes that are not present for men and boys. And I looked at those processes in all of those countries. So there are some that are very strongly knitted together, but even in the countries that weren't developed, they were still evident. And I think it's because those processes, so things like court processes, offending, things like housing, accommodation, safe spaces to live, okay? The provision, grant funding provision that goes to underdeveloped countries will still target those Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which are base level food and shelter, you know, so those common denominators were still present in developing countries for me. So I'd identified 13 common areas. They were, I couldn't possibly realm them off right now, given the time we've got, but they are basically court process, police, surrounding services, legislation, strategic planning, human rights, education, health and well-being, and they were common across all of them, all of the world, all of the countries I looked at, they were common. And when I looked at it, because my research, when I finished with the countries, one of the moments was, okay, how can this happen? And what influences that? Because one of the questions I asked myself was, there are bound to be influences and influences rather that impact on these policies, and what is that? So I looked at things like European law, because obviously we're based in the UK, so I looked at that. I looked at the Arab Union and the African Union. I looked at the UN, okay? I looked at how strategies were formulated, okay? And I looked at things like there are 15 observer organizations that impact on UN law, okay? So how the UN operates, there is influences within the UN. There are 15 global agencies. So agencies like WHO, the World Health Organization is one of them. So I looked at all of their policies as well, because I was looking at how are these all created, and the end product was, I thought there's only the one place that kind of governs, because they govern human rights, the UN, You know, the UN, there's 6 committees, and how they are created, they are the ones that are the largest influence. So me coming back to the UK and thinking, okay, this has got to be a ground level UK, you know, working campaign, just was not going to be enough. It just wasn't, because always it would be hitting against UN policy. It just would. And if I've worked, one of the mentalities behind me writing the campaign was, if I've worked for 30 years and in a myriad of different agencies in social services and then running organisations, and I didn't see the full picture after 30 years of working in that environment, then there's something wrong somewhere. Either it's not being communicated in the right way, or somebody's not listening, you know, because when we have a communicator, we have a sender and a receiver. So either it's not being sent to the government, or it's not being received. And that's the element of how this grew. And I thought, there's no point in even trying this in the UK. You know, I did a search in year 3. I did a UK-wide search of organisations that were supporting men and boys. Okay, yeah. And one of the things that was quite profound for me, that at the time I only found 3 organisations. Okay, now I did the Google searches, I did the normal asking, emailing, and my Google searches ranged from what agencies support men and boys, to men who are experiencing suicidal thoughts. You know, I put a range of issues that men may experience. I looked at people service, front-facing people services policy. That's what I looked at. Okay. So from education, health, anything that a person who would need to survive, live independently and thrive needed, those are the policies I looked at. And by the time I got from Australia, country 3, I'd left domestic abuse behind. This became a human rights equality issue for men and boys.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So my journey.
Tell me this, as this is kind of more of a devil's advocate question, but
okay.
A common retort from largely the kind of feminists lobby or kind of women's groups would be that there are specific services for women because services are by default directed at men. What would your response to that proposal be?
Okay, I would challenge, severely challenge that on a few different levels. On a female level, if you are not willing to have a man or boy mentioned in an active law governance or strategy, then you are who you say they are. Because if you know anything about services and how they need to be delivered, the only way that money will be spent on services is if the identified need is written within acts of law, policy or strategies. Okay, if you do not mention a gender in that gender will not receive funding. Okay, and an example of that is currently in the UK, projects are requesting over £400 million funding for domestic abuse services. Men's projects get less than 1% of that. Okay, yeah. Now marking that, men are 1/3 of the victims of domestic abuse that are known currently in the UK. All right, so unless you put men and boys in policy, in strategies, in legislation and acts of law, they will not get any services that support their needs. Yeah. All right, that's a frontline female issue. Because I want to say to women and girls and all of that, while you may like the feminine agenda and you may like moving forward with that, nobody's stopping you. But you have brothers, husbands, sons, nephews, and best friends and work colleagues, okay? And to any woman who thinks it's okay that a legislative document does not include both genders, you are very, very wrong, okay? And on a level, if we're at UN and we're looking at UN acts of law and all of the stuff that they're pushing out into this one. The UN has got a directive that actually says the narrative of anything that comes out of their offices needs to be written mindful that both narratives should be men and women, okay? That the narrative should always be equal, okay? Now the UN policy goes against that drive, okay? Yeah. It goes against it.
Yeah, and
I'm so sorry, Brian. It's something I feel extremely passionate about, as you could probably tell.
No,
but I am.
I completely empathise, and kind of one of the reasons I was so excited about your project, because I do feel that it's something that is kind of plugging a gap that hasn't really kind of been. I think it's something that is slotting into an area that hasn't been addressed in terms of that high level, that policy level at UN level. And I agree. When I started looking for a definition of gendered violence, because I do think gendered violence, that term, has a dramatic impact on not just the services provided to both men and women who are experiencing or in the area of domestic violence, but cascading from that. And just to reiterate kind of what your point about, kind of that any woman listening should understand that this is a dramatic impact on, fathers, sons, husbands, nephews, etc. It also has a dramatic impact on many women, and particularly girls. And that was certainly my first perspective on it was, this is insane, because boys and girls living in homes where there is domestic violence are not being served by this strategy, which is political. So sorry for that interjection. It was kind of at the EU level and the the UN level where the definitions were very clearly defined about gendered violence. And you can, is it fair? Would you agree that you can then trace that back to how that sort of concept impacts on public policy in England?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's pathways. They're very clear pathways. You can see the relationship between the UK and legislative guidances that are being created within the UK. You can see there's a very clear pathway on the influences of that. So if you're looking at UN or EU, you can see, if you put them side by side, you can see which influences which. If you look at timescales when they were created, if you look at meetings and different strategic planning groups that took place, you can map it as a map.
Yeah.
It's very clear. It's not hard. It takes a lot of work. It's a lot of work. But you can see it. It's very clear to be seen.
Yeah, and that's it. But kind of, if you're not sort of working in this area or specifically kind of looking for it, it's not something people necessarily realize how much of an impact it can have. One example I'd suggest, and I noticed that your walk on 12th September, which we'll keep mentioning, it's going to Downing Street, but it's beginning at the Equality and Human Rights Commission building. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I'm assuming there's a reason for that.
Yeah, it was. Yes. There's a significance in equality is something that most people take for granted, and particularly women. We obviously, I'm a woman, okay, and I've worked in this environment, and I've supported women's issues for a really long time, as I have men's issues. But there is if you and I've done these tasks, okay, I've done this has been part of what I've done. If you stop and ask a woman on the street about does she see any barriers to any education she wants to experience, even teenage girls, they will tell you no. Okay, they will tell you no. If you stop a woman in the street and ask a woman what career would she like to go to and does she see any barriers to any career pathways, she will tell you now no. I know, I've asked. Okay, this has been part of the research. I've asked. One of the things that was significant when I finished the research was this was not about domestic abuse anymore. It was about equality. When you look at equality, you realise equality is about human rights, okay? It is about having a choice, okay? It's not about this 50-50. This 50-50 is not right. It's not correct. There's lots of reasons why it's not correct, but it's not right, okay? The equality equals choice. Right. That is the most fundamental ground level starting point. Equality is choice, all right? Now, and equality is wrapped up in human rights.
Yeah, and if I could interject again, that's really how it's reflected in law as well. It's, kind of these equality of outcome concepts, while they can be useful at, looking at potential barriers, as you say, kind of it's about choice and equality of opportunity. The right to that equality of opportunity is what's written into our law. So yeah, good. Okay.
So from a female perspective, you've got an environment where women know they have choice now, and they know that if they don't have choice, they have a voice now. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at equality for men and boys, what you will see is that they don't have the choice, okay, because a lot of the strategies, a lot of way things, education and health and all of that are being designed now. Men do not have that choice, and the reason they don't is because they don't have a voice either, okay? Yeah. They don't have an equal voice in the stuff that's formulated through acts of law legislation. Domestic abuse bill is a prime example. Okay, men and boys have not had the opportunity to feed into that. Right now, every legislative document that comes out, every strategy that comes out, part of the criteria for them to be created is that the government has to consult with all stakeholders. That is present in UN objectives, and it is present in all governments. It is not practiced. It's just not practiced. So the reason going from the Equality and Human Rights Office was it was the beginning of something. It needs to be a beginning with a voice. It was symbolic of men having their voice. I don't want to have a voice for men. I don't want to, Brian. I don't. I genuinely don't want to have a voice for men. But I cannot sit down as a woman and not do something about it. I can't. Yeah. And to lead from the Equality and Human Rights Office in London to walking directly to Downing Street is a direct passage that needs to be linked together. They have to be, because currently they're not. And it's as simple as that. They just aren't. And so sorry, go on.
No, I think that's entirely right. And I think that one of the divisions, I guess, that identity politics creates is this suggestion or presumption, and this is something very much kind of feminists will very often say, that, well, kind of men's problems are men's problems. Men should go and sort these out. And I 100% don't agree with that, because many men have and are involved in human rights for all and equality of opportunity and equality and human rights for women. And we all have that social responsibility. And I go further that the very clear difference between what you might call the feminist movement and the men's rights movement is there is a significant diversity in the men's rights movement, particularly in terms of the number of women in leadership positions that you do not see. So I think that's very very welcome. The other thing I just interject just with the thinking of the kind of the link with the United Nations. One thing I've observed is the Equality and Human Rights Commission regularly reports on the UN Convention of Equality, CEDAW Convention of Equality for Women, and that's sort of essentially, I think, a good example of where that infrastructure impacts at the local level or the UK level, because UK are signatories to that convention, which means then that our equality body is focused on reporting on those tram lines, that infrastructure, which is looking at equality purely for one sex. So men are completely written out. There's no comparative treaty. There's no comparative reports. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, and it goes even further than that. I mean, we look. Okay, let's assume that legislation's been written, and we'll assume that policy's written, and we'll assume that all the strategic planning for fiscal policy, spending, and all of that is being planned for the next 3 to 5 years. Okay, so we assume all of that for all of these countries, and then you start looking at it. Okay, now if you go to, for example, Nigeria, or you go to America, or you go to Canada, or you go to Australia, or you go here in the UK, and you look at who is governing that equality. Who is governing equality? Who is governing the human rights section to that? And you will find Nigeria, for example, is all women. It's all women. There's not even any diversity within those mechanisms for managing how equality is managed. So their team is dominantly women. Okay. Now, if you go on to the UN website and you type in UN equality and you see what comes up, and you will see probably around 5 pages currently. And all of those pages are filled with women's needs, all of them. There isn't, without exception, all of them are filled with women's needs. If you look at things like structures that govern the UN, if you look at, we have UN women, we don't have any UN men, okay? Yeah. If you look at the way, and even just in Wales itself, if you look at the equality, the team that manage equality in Wales, and you will see they're dominantly women, okay? The structures that influence equality across the whole of the world, I have seen a dominance in female membership. I have not seen any equality for men in there. I wish, right, that I could speak for maybe like 6 weeks, because even if I did for 6 weeks, right, I still would be able to tell you where the inequality is for men and boys. I still wouldn't need to repeat myself. And for women who would watch this, right, up until about 7 years ago, everything that I saw, everything in my job role, my profession, every time somebody put a pile of paperwork on a strategic planning group table and said, right, let's start, I picked it up, I read the paperwork, I looked at what was in front of me, and I moved towards the agenda. That was the worst thing I could have done, okay? Because I should have gone below those agendas. For women out there, they think they've bought into this kind of environment where women don't have equality. In every single legislative document I have read, women have a voice. Men and boys don't. And Brian, I am hoping that I get challenged, right? Because I'm hoping there's people who are going to challenge me, because anything I say comes out based on that research, you know?
Yeah.
That evidence. I can evidence everything I say.
Yeah,
so,
and that's, I would say, kind of one of the advantages of being a woman, and this has come up many times, is it's a little bit harder, it's not impossible, but it's a little bit harder to call you out as a misogynist, which is kind of quite often the automatic reaction by some leaders in this area.
Can I say to that, and can you please include it?
Yeah.
One of the most painful things
You okay?
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. It's a very annoying, it's a frustrating subject.
Sorry, can I just tell you, one of the hardest things that I've ever had to kind of take on board is that it's me here, not a man. And I'd like you to carry on filming this.
That's okay.
Because
go ahead.
Sorry. The reason being is because you know when someone has been suppressed to the point where it is disgusting to humanity and human rights, when they do not have a okay. And one of the hardest things for me to accept was that I shouldn't be here because I believe in human rights. So I believe in choice and I believe I have a right. And one of the hardest things that I realized, one of the biggest learning curves for me was that a man doesn't have that. Okay, because as soon as a man opens up and says, "Can I just tell you this?" instantly he is silenced. Instantly. And that was one of the most profound things that affected me emotionally. Because you look around the world, I sat down, my year of anger and frustration, I found myself sitting in cafes and restaurants and listening to conversations of people around you.
Yeah.
And I would sit next to women who would be talking about their husbands or their sons or their partners or their son-in-laws, and in such a negative context. It was mind to me, because when you know what I know, and when you've learned what I've learned about where men are situated in this world, nothing that comes out of anybody's mouth that doesn't hold respect for them is not acceptable. Okay. And if a man gets something wrong and he needs to be held accountable for that, then I would do that. If a woman does something wrong and needs to be held accountable, I would do that also. You see, I could not. It was so very difficult for me to accept that men couldn't have the same voice that I could have. And that's one of the key driving things that pushes me forward, because I can't accept that. I can't accept that. I cannot accept that a man can't have a voice. I can't accept it. So,
and nor should you, because I certainly, I suppose from my perspective, I think men and women share many similar kind of challenges throughout life, but there are some challenges that are perhaps more unique to each sex. I certainly understand that kind of my wife will experience challenges that I won't have experienced in the same way, and I wouldn't stand for her not to have a voice. And it's absolutely parity. I mean, two things maybe perhaps just to contribute to this point. It might give you solace that certainly a perspective that's come up quite a few times in interviews that I've done is a quote from Professor Jordan Peterson, which Elizabeth Hobson, who I believe you've met or talked to, I should have come across from, which is women reigning your crazy sisters. And that certainly rang resonance with me, because I do believe that women have a very dramatic leadership role in this, because absolutely, kind of women do control the narrative around this subject matter, as you say, particularly in kind of positions of power. We've never had an equalities minister. I don't think it would even be countenance to have an equalities minister who would be male, certainly at the minute. So there's that aspect. And I do think for me, one of the things that motivates me in this area is also the contribution to the psyche of young women, because I'm surprised you said sort of like, kind of every young woman you asked, didn't see barriers, because and certainly, that's my experience again with, kind of young women that, I've talked to. But also, we hear so much about, they hear so much about all the barriers, particularly to likes of STEM subjects, etc. And particularly, I mean, the equal pay thing, or the gender pay gap. I mean, I know plenty of young women who sincerely believe that men are literally, quite literally, they're going to go into a workforce where they're literally paid less than a man, and that's not necessarily a healthy thing for young women either. But listen, I'm conscious of time. That's very useful. I know certainly on your website you've kind of set out a lot about your kind of findings across those areas. Is the research kind of formally published? Is it something that you ever kind of publish formally?
No, because no. The reason being because one of the in the campaign, I started writing the campaign in year 2. Okay, I knew by year 2 that I would have to do something about this, so I started writing the campaign in year to. I'd never written a campaign before. Okay, so part of my learning was to look at what the risk management in making sure that I did this properly included me looking at how I could present this data to the world, okay?
Yeah.
And what risks there were that would get this data dismissed, okay? Because I didn't want this data to be dismissed, all right? So I've had dealings with researchers and things like that because of my job and what I've done in the past, but I wanted to make sure that I had risk managed this campaign so that first we were transparent, secondly anything we did would always be based on evidential information and data, and thirdly that would be up to date and relevant here and now. So when I wrote the campaign in year 2, I did a risk management thing with this. I thought, okay, I am just me. Okay, yeah, okay, I'm qualified. Yeah, okay, I've run services. Yeah, okay, I got knowledge, but I'm just me. So the campaign, I knew and I identified that the research that I completed, which kind of, it's not really finished, but it's always ongoing now. But before we were due to launch, the research that took us up to launch date, I knew in year 2 that I would have to repeat that, okay? And I know it sounds really silly, but one of the risks to being dismissed was out-of-date research, okay? You'll know this, and anybody who works within this field will know. If you present data or research that is out of date, it allows a window of somebody to say, relevant anymore. So the part of the plan for the campaign is that I repeat the last 5 years. So it's up-to-date research, and I will systematically do that over the next however long it takes, until I'm a bit I feel a bit awful saying this, but even if I have to shame people into sitting up and listening, because the research I did was dated 2016, 2017.
Okay.
Some of it's 2018. Lots of legislation has changed since then because reviews went through anyway, and some of the information that pushed those reviews forward, like the domestic abuse bill, for example, in the UK, some of the stuff that's put forward would have been out of date, so I'm repeating it. So you'll see on the site systematically around the 13 key areas that I'd identified as being the common denominators. Around those areas over the next however many years, I will repeat what I've done. So it'll be loud and clear, and it'll be relevant, and it'll be new data.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense.
Does that make sense? Because
yeah,
I didn't want to. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine. I mean, and that's kind of largely kind of how I probably would have interpreted, from your website, etc. And our initial conversation, that this was something to a certain degree was almost like a personal journey for yourself in terms of kind of doing this research. I mean, I suppose actually kind of we could probably move into the section where kind of maybe kind of probing some questions that kind of subscribers have raised and stuff.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I know that kind of certainly one of them was that's kind of I suppose it was slightly suspicious, but sort of the question was, who's funding this? Who's funding you, and who's funding your project? So do you maybe want to talk to that?
Okay, who's funding this? Me.
Yeah.
I am funding this, me. Currently, I've spent £25,000 of my own money funding this. One of the elements within the campaign, I am used to procurement, okay?
Yeah.
Somebody back in year 3 said to me, Sally, take it to Labour, they'll fund you. My answer to them was, I'm not taking it to any party, this is a cross-party issue, okay?
Yeah. Okay.
I'm used to funding, I'm used to applying for grants, I'm used to procurement, this is a world that I've run a business in, but I knew that I didn't want to answer to anybody's outcomes, nobody's. Okay. I will never accept money off anybody who thinks they can govern this. Up until this point, it's been my own money. It's £25,000 of my own money that I've spent on this. We've set up a funding. We've set up a fund me page. Now and again, I kind of send a prayer up and say, you know, can you please donate, a multi-million-pound person donate, and please don't tag any power issues into there, because I'll send your money back. So I frequently have that kind of wish and prayer.
Okay, well,
but
I'll leave a link just in case any multimillionaires happen to be watching.
That would be really good. That would be, yeah. Anybody that feels the need to have equality in their environment, then please welcome, donate. And I promise you, one of the campaign promises from me is I will not take a wage or a penny from the money. I will not. So we're raising funds. I have 14 job roles that I need to fill to make this a success. I know that, I've done the analysis, or to make this as visible and give it the best opportunity that I can to make it a success. So we have 14 job roles. Mine is not one of them. I will work on this until the end. But I won't be taking it.
Just to chip in on that point, because I know you're based in the outskirts of Wales. Is that correct?
I live, just on the outskirts of Cardiff.
Outskirts of Cardiff. So that's what I meant to say. Kind of because my understanding is this is sort of a grassroots project that you're very much sort of developing. So would it be fair to say if there's anybody kind of living in that local area that maybe wants to volunteer and help, is that something that you'd like to?
It is. We have yes. We part of the strategy is to set up a committee in every country. Okay. We are developing a website at the moment. When the new website is live, it should be in the beginning of October. There will be a world map on one of the pages, and when you click into each country will have its own page. So one of the targets for the campaign is, targets are that we will have a committee set up in each country. I want one in the UK. Okay. Yeah. So we're actively looking for a company for a committee now here. We have specific roles that are tied into the 13 areas that we're targeting. But we've published that, and we're going to continue publishing it. But I'm looking for volunteers anywhere, because the world now, thanks to Zoom and lots of other, kind of essential IT kind of equipment now, we can work from anywhere. We don't need geographical ties anymore. So yeah, I'm looking for people to help, because currently it's whoever I'm paying for, and I can't continue to spend my own money on this. I just can't. I just haven't got it. If I had it in year 3, I'd said, I remember saying for a full year, if I got to sell my house, I'll sell my house. But I've got to try and get some help on this. I really do, because
that's pretty serious commitment.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's another thing, and I'll kind of mention this again at the end when I'm coming to summing up. People in different countries, if they perhaps are kind of part of organisations already who might be able to look at setting up a committee in their country to contact yourself. Just on the kind of funding again, have you attempted? I mean, I understand what you're saying about sort of not wanting to be beholden to anyone.
Yes.
In terms of likes of kind of community funding, I know that there's quite a lot of funding out there. Have you attempted to? Have you experienced any kind of roadblocks?
Well, we looked. Roadblocks. Yes, I did speak to the lottery, who and explained that I was trying to raise awareness for men and boys, and we have got some projects that we'd like to do. The campaign is media. For me, I'll just be. We're hoping to just put out media. We want to show the work that people are doing, right? So I've talked to the lottery and requested that they consider funding us, but they cannot fund a political campaign. They can fund some of the raising awareness projects we've got, but the projects that we've got are designed for other people to do it, So partnerships working and things like that,
Yeah, no, that's understandable. It's interesting that sort of arguably, kind of some of the organisations that take public money aren't involved in very kind of political posturing in this area. So,
I mean, part of the campaign, one of the areas in the campaign is fiscal spending. And it's about, but it's completely disabled. Without the right legislation in place, that fiscal spending is completely disabled. You're always going to hit the barriers of local authorities providing grants or funding for organisations like mine. And with the greatest respect, I'd love to work in partnership with somebody like you or one of the other men's groups to be able to do some projects that would raise awareness, but we don't want to deliver. I don't want to deliver services. I really genuinely don't. One, because Brian, I am not a man. Okay, I am empowered by the female voice, maybe because I can say things that maybe other people would be shut down for. But that's the only part I want. And I don't want to be you. If I can see change happening in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, I would be happy to hand this campaign to somebody else who is a man, who understands the male perspective more than I do. So I just want to. So funding, I've been told we won't get funding. I've tried to get funding for the whole family domestic abuse service that is non-gendered. We still can't get funding for it because it's non-gendered. And we've tried, and the government paid £500,000 to create this, Brian, and they won't fund us to deliver it. And it's because it's whole family and it's gendered, it's non-gendered. It's gender equal.
And that's such a roadblock. I've seen the likes of the Mankind Commission, who are kind of working in the area of domestic abuse. I still don't think are getting any public money, and that's partly because they don't follow the likes of the Duluth model that is sort of kind of wrapped up in so much of the public funding. So I was going to say I'm conscious that I know, for example, there were a few sort of grumbles about the T-shirts aspect of the walk, and at either before or after this section, I'll have included a more detailed kind of edit of the conversation that we had about the T-shirts, which I think kind of answers that more clearly. So I do think that was kind of in part my fault, because I was trying to edit down a short video, kind of to attract people's attention to the walk on the 12th, and the purpose of the T-shirts is to, apart from anything else, provide a kind of bit of a visual spectacle of solidarity. I would have thought, but to clarify, it's not compulsory, and kind of, I mean, you're saying you're just basically going to kind of cut even in terms of the production of those T-shirts.
The cost on the site is literally the T-shirt, what it costs to get it made, the postage to send it out, and the fee for Eventbrite. That's it.
Yeah,
there's literally not 1 pence.
Yeah, I can well believe that, because apart from that, they do look like very nice T-shirts.
They are.
Yeah, but having supported other people on YouTube, because quite often they will sell T-shirts. Kind of your T-shirts are very reasonably priced, and from my perspective, personally, I don't see anything wrong with kind of fundraising for our community projects, and I think a lot of men's groups do that and would recognise that. But just to emphasise, the T-shirts are optional if you want to come along.
Well, because I spent 2 days with Eventbrite, because when we set up the advert, there was issues. We added them as an add-on, so that you could book on the walk separately, and then the T-shirt was an add-on, and the Eventbrite was just a headache. But if you look at it when you order, you'll see ticket and add-on. I had to get Eventbrite to change it so that the ticket was free and the add-on was the T-shirt. So you only paid for the add-on, which is a t-shirt. I think, I don't know why. I think I know why there's been a few statements about, and on Twitter and our social media, it's only been from one group. So I've not had anybody else say anything to me directly, so I don't know.
Yeah, no, but I mean, most of the feedback's been reasonably encouraging. I've had a lot of likes on the video. I've kind of surprised with kind of a few quite cynical comments. Partly, I'm not entirely surprised. I think actually it possibly is reflective of the kind of professionalism of your website. Actually, I think because kind of, as I say, a couple of the questions were, I guess when a new group appears on the scene in the men's rights movement, because certainly something I would be conscious of, and particularly with an eye on the concept of a minister for men, which is a campaign that, kind of to a degree I would support, is that, kind of mainstream feminist groups are increasingly venturing into the sphere. I mean, domestic violence is a very good example of that in terms of the Respects helpline, that are, kind of the best way to promote men's rights is to promote them in the way that fits with their political philosophy. So, I think that's possibly, part of the cynicism in terms of, because one of the questions was, why is a woman doing this? But I think we've addressed.
I know.
Yeah, I think we've addressed that.
I mean, I don't mind being challenged, Brian. I don't mind anybody questioning me. I genuinely don't. But don't do it with innuendos. Do it directly. Do you see what I'm saying? Directly challenge me. Ask me for anything you want. I will give it to you. You can check me out. You can do what you like. I expect that. I would do that myself, to look at ethics and values, But don't do it with innuendos. Do it as a direct challenge. At least give me the opportunity to answer that question and show you the honesty behind that.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I would ask. Sorry.
No, you're just right, and I mean that's something I'd sort of pinned in, kind of the comment section is kind of like if people have questions, line them up, because absolutely, I do get that. I guess kind of the men's rights movement can be slandered and kind of all that sort of thing. So I think there can be an element of cynicism, but when I saw this project, it was kind of I suppose my initial instinct was, well, somebody's doing something physically on the ground, and my instinct is always to try and help promote particularly kind of new projects that are kind of maybe haven't kind of fully not everybody's heard of yet, for example, kind of find their voice, but also that certainly my large experience of the men's rights movement is people are generally in it for the right reason, and they're wanting to collaborate, kind of thing. So there is that. Yeah, I mean the other thing I sort of mentioned this, that some people had sort of commented on your dress, in the sense that that's a clear visualization that you're a woman of faith, and I guess I suppose particularly in the secular world, people can be suspicious of any sort of organized religion. I know certainly there are kind of attitudes towards Islam as well, and I can kind of see both sides of that to an extent, because I come from Ireland, and grew up kind of during a period of troubles where I was, I would be in England quite a lot, and I'd lived in England for a while as well, and I would have been used to quite regularly being stopped and searched, and all that sort of aspect. And some people would be a bit nervous because I came from the place where the bombs were coming. So I get that sort of sometimes there are stereotypes attached to those things. I suppose the kind of main question I wanted to ask, and this might sort of address some of those concerns. Essentially, I mean, I suppose kind of for me, not being being a religious person, particularly I describe myself as a spiritual person, the aspects, I suppose, culturally, my experience of the likes of a religion that imposes certain dress codes on women specifically, it's challenging. I'll be honest about that. But but the whole point is that I absolutely believe in freedom of religion and freedom of and equality of opportunity for everybody. So I suppose there are some stereotypes about how women are perhaps kind of treated in the Muslim faith. Do you want to sort of comment on that? Is that because I think I suppose actually the key reason I'm asking this is because I would perceive it as a chink in terms of a direction that you may face criticism from, in that you're likely a kind of a front for a patriarchal kind of belief system. So if you want
I'm sorry, yeah, it's okay.
No, it is quite funny, I know.
Yeah, no, forgive me. First of all, I am a revert, okay, which means I chose to become a Muslim. I wasn't born to Islam. I'm Welsh. My family's Welsh, hundreds of years of Welsh, and I chose to become Muslim, and I chose in 2009.
Okay.
Nobody ever made me cover. Nobody ever made me do anything I ever wanted to do. I always made my own decisions, okay?
Yeah.
I am probably somebody with one foot in one world and one foot in another world, but I am always true to my beliefs and my faith, okay? So that's what I sit there. I've been told before that women, I risk being challenged about being more of a leaning towards patriarch society than I would around equality for women and girls, and my answer to that is I believe in a freedom of choice. And if anybody came to me who was a woman and told me I don't have choice, I would do exactly the same for them as I would for a man who said the same thing. So my position on this is I don't really, and forgive me because I know this is a bit brutal, and I don't mean to be brutal, but nobody is ever going to be able to strip away my voice, no matter what they say to me. So if you want to say that I've got to lean in towards patriarch, I will say to you, you are right. But I've also got to lean in towards feminism, because I believe in equal choice and equal rights and equal voice. And nobody's ever going to take my voice away from me, no matter what they say to me. It's just not going to happen. So, and I welcome somebody trying. I genuinely welcome somebody trying to say that to me, because what they will get is they will get an independent woman who makes her own decisions, own choices, and believes in equal opportunity for everybody. That's what they're going to get. So, and I mean, I don't mind talking about my faith. I don't mind talking about being a woman. I don't mind talking about, why I'm doing it. I really don't mind. My life, thankfully, is very transparent. And I'm ready for whatever anybody wants to say to me. If they don't like me because I'm Muslim, well, get over it. I am, and I'm going to stay that way. And I know that's very flippant, but that's my faith, and I'm not changing that for anybody. And that's what human rights says. It says that I can be who I want to be, and I choose to be Muslim, and I'm a woman, and I'm glad. Sorry.
Yeah. No. I wouldn't have expected kind of any different, and kind of. Some people have issues with balding, grey bearded men. It's sort of we all, I suppose. As I say, I think kind of the cynicism, I think, was kind of kind of just sort of partly. Well, it was from a couple of comments, and I guess that they're taking that from a short 5-minute video about a project, and I think kind of there was maybe some cynicism about the actual project, and then that gets projected onto kind of what is this about, and then kind of where does that flow from?
I mean, Brian, I get it. I genuinely get it. I mean, who am I to anybody who's watching this? Who am I? Nobody knows me. Nobody knows my objectives. Nobody knows who I am, what I want. You know, nobody, you see a British woman who's a Muslim who's sitting in front of a camera talking about men's rights. I mean, that's a bit of an anomaly. You know, it's just, and I get it, and I really genuinely don't mind challenge. I don't mind challenge from women. I don't mind challenge from, I don't care, because I see it as an opportunity to open that discussion up. The only thing that I have zero tolerance for is somebody that's going to come through a back door and try to, and not face me. Somebody who doesn't face me and say to me, Sally, why are you doing that? Or what, you know, what, how can you do that? Show me, show me. Somebody who doesn't face me and say these things to me, I've got no time for. I won't listen. I just won't listen, because then all they're trying to do is create an environment of conflict. And for me, if you can't face me and ask me to answer and ask me to say whatever is the reality behind what I'm trying to achieve, then to me, I can't give you the time. I'm too busy, way too busy for that, you know. So I don't mind. No. So if any of your speakers, what you can put in your footnotes or anything is, if anybody wants to contact me, or if you want to repeat this in an open forum, I have no problem in doing that. No problem.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, that's fair. You know, and I, to be honest, I sort of felt uncomfortable even kind of sort of asking that.
Don't.
No. I did think it was sort of important too, because it's sort of, I think, as you say, sometimes these things aren't addressed head on, and you know, that was certainly, you know, a couple of comments were sort of addressing that. I think I think one of the comments was sort of assuming that yourself or perhaps myself had a massive budget in terms of producing that short trailer. So for anybody expecting United Colors of Benetton in terms of the dance,
check you out, Brian. If they think about you and I, then check us out. Do you know what I mean? Because I have spent 25 grand on my money, and I got to prove it, right? And I am up for being challenged about who's financing me, because the way I've set this is up that I don't align myself with anybody, right? I've the risk management that have gone into this, so nobody influences me, and nobody will ever be able to say that we are influenced, right? But if they think that we're professional and got hundreds of thousands of pounds going into this, then you were doing all right. That bit of creativity was beautiful. So go, Brian.
We're doing, not doing too badly, I don't think. I've already got a segment from our original conversation, which I'll expand out, which talks about that dance project, or that dance video, which you know was very visual and colourful, and you know, kind of it really, I think it gave a lot of energy to that project. And you were saying you're hoping to maybe kind of get them to do an extended piece.
They want to do it. We had the price of a t-shirt. We had a deal. So they understood that I couldn't pay for it, but they were so excited. We had a deal. So they want to do more. They want to do some more with us. So yeah. And they're amazing family. They're a family, they are. They're absolutely amazing. Very creative, you know. Kids are lovely. It's so sweet.
It was a cool little dance. I'm just going to check. I think I've kind of touched on any of the, you know, kind of questions or whatever that were flagged. You know, the funding thing, I think, was kind of one of the key things. I think sort of like somebody suspected you're kind of like a stooge of the United Nations, you know, because you sort of like appeared out of nowhere.
We're opening a shop on Amazon. We're going to try and be sustainable. So we've got a little shop on our own site, and we're going to open a proper shop on Amazon. And I'm praying that we can kind of build that shop up, and anything we make from that will go into the project. So that's that's what we're looking at. I'm not asking anybody for any money. I don't want to, not unless I absolutely.
Well, no, I mean, you know, kind of if people want to, if there's a millionaire out there that wants to contribute to the 13, I mean, what's your ambition for kind of, because that is quite ambitious to sort of try and fund 13 positions.
Yeah, it's because they are like, we've got an inbound marketing manager because we want to make the shop work so that we can be sustainable. So I know that somebody managing the media is really, really important. We've got a couple of journalists we want to employ We want to report on other people doing their work, people like you and some of the other guys. So we want. I need some researchers, and all these jobs they're high paid jobs. They're not, they're not low paid jobs. So we're trying to raise some funds, and I just want to fund them for 3 years. That's what I'm looking for.
And so, if you'd like to support the campaign, join the walk in London, or just ask Sally a question, you'll find links and contact details in the show notes below. My thanks to Sally for taking the time to talk to me, and an extra special thanks to everyone who's listened this far, because I appreciate it was a long one. And indeed, if you have listened this far, don't forget that it really, really helps when you press that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment. Or better still, share this video far and wide on social media and with your friends. Thanks in advance for helping to keep this show on the road, and as always, if you see an elephant,
Can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.
The Glass Blind Spot is brought to you by you, because it's your views, your likes and your comments that keep this show on the road.